1990 was the year I was enrolled into Forget Tomorrow, Just Live for Today University. On that campus was where I met my old roommate who went by the name Sin. Back then, Sin and I were inseparable. He could get me into whatever crowd I wanted to join because he had the hookup since he was seen as the cool kid. He could get me ahead of any line as long as I let him take control through my skin. So Sin showed me around, and in no time we became besties. And how could we not when we first bonded over my favorite thing, food. Whenever I sat in the cafeteria, he would always sit and eat with me. How ironic that there is where he introduced me to gluttony, who did a real work on my tummy. Food is to be treated as a necessity, but instead it became my addiction. I started stuffing my face to the point where I ballooned with envy against those whose bodies weren't as heavy. And although there was a simple solution to my problem, Sin was an advocate of slothfulness, so forget mentioning exercise. My old roommate, he was so concerned with my love life. He coached me on how to dress and interact with the opposite sex, because he knows just what the typical male wants. Show more than what you're willing to on an average day, and be willing to do more after you've gone on a few dates. This was college. I remember how quickly I became acquainted with lust because that one date Sin convinced me to go on eventually led to me shaking hands with fornication. And not too long after, Sin introduced me to this one kid called Greed, who persuaded me into believing that when my actions threatened to lead to a birthing reaction, giving up my own life for another to survive would have been too much to ask of me. I only wanted to have a good time. And at the very moment where I conjured up that thought is when I met Mr. Lying. Sin and him always threw crazy house parties, and Mr. Lying was that one drunken guest who said outlandish statements that at the time seemed to make sense, but that was only because you were both under the influence of sin. So I lied and convinced myself into thinking that contacting murder would be okay if in the case I had to face a 9-month trial as a consequence of the connections I made through sin. He was that roommate who would have told you that throughout my whole life he looked out for me. But Sin doesn't have a soul to lose. That's why he doesn't mind being used by Satan to expel yours from you.